Hello and welcome back to this presentation from the Urban Penguin. My name is Andrew Mallett and we're going to dive into something now that you might think of being quite simple. But as always, there's a little bit more to understand about comments. Comments are lines of code that are going to be ignored by the Python interpreter, so they're not going to be read. They are used to add explanation, notes and descriptions for yourselves or other developers. We can also use comments to exclude lines of code, perhaps whilst we're debugging. When we're looking at creating comments, we can use single line comments, and you'll see later we really only have single line comments. But if we put the comment or the hash symbol or its proper name, the octothorpe, if we put that at the beginning of the line, then the rest of the line is going to be ignored by the Python interpreter. So here we're not really adding a comment as such, but we're ensuring that the print line is not going to run. Whereas where we look at this, we've put the comment at the end of the line. So this isn't stopping any code running, but it's just giving a little bit of explanation that we are perhaps starting a process or a block of code or some lines of code that are running something that will be ended later. So we're adding, hopefully, helpful documentation. Now, I did mention multi-line comments, and I'm sure I'm going to get blasted for this. You are going to see multi-line comments, and you will see, in general, they work. A multi-line comment can be used to comment out, well, quite simply, multiple lines. You can start it with 3 quotes, either 3 single quotes or 3 double quotes. Here we're using 3 single quotes, and if we opened with 3 single quotes, we must end with 3 single quotes. But this way, everything between the triple quotes can be viewed as a comment. However, and there's always a however, multi-line comments aren't properly supported by Python, and they don't meet the Python style guide of PEP 8. Our triple quotes can be used for multi-line strings or something that is called doc strings, which are used to describe the purpose of functions, classes, and modules. When we take a look at doc strings, they use the triple quotes, and PEP 8 should tell us that we are using triple double quotes, and they describe then our doc strings in functions, classes, and modules. Our comments should only use the hash or octothorpe. Even if we have to comment out multiple lines, we would use then the octothorpe or hash on each line. We can see the yes and no in the right hand side of the screen. Our function add has got a doc string that describes its purpose. Whereas where we shouldn't use it is to comment out the 2 print lines that we've got underneath the no. Now remember, we're only getting into the very basics, so we have to understand comments. But of course, you're going to see comments written in many different ways, so it's worthwhile digging a little bit deeper. So we're going to be taking a look at our single line comments, our rest of line comments, our supposed multi-line comments, and then understanding how we can use doc strings. Come on, let's find our editor. And hello and a really big warm welcome. Look at this, we're in my IDE working with PyCharm from JetBrains. We're going to begin within PyCharm, but later on we can move back to our Jupyter Notebook just to see some of the differences between the two. But we need to understand a little about our comments, and I can go through and comment my code by beginning the line with the hash symbol or the octothorpe, if you really want to give it its full name. But we can then go through and explain the code that is coming up. Now, this really isn't necessary. I think anyone could understand what the print command was doing, but if we felt it was necessary, we could choose to comment it. But be very wary about over-commenting your code. It's not going to be well appreciated. I can go through and execute the code, and we're going to see then that, of course, the comment isn't evaluated, but our print statement is. But we could go through and comment out the print statement as well. Now, this isn't really a comment in the true sense of the word, but as we execute the code, we can see the code is not executed, which is great for debugging and tools such as that, where we're trying to exclude a piece of code from the operation. But let's go through now and on-comment the line. I could put an explainer, especially if it's going to be very short, towards the end of the line. Again, I can start it with a comment. So using print. So it's the rest of the line that is now being commented. So the print statement still is evaluated by the Python interpreter. Now, let's get into that contentious subject of multi-line comments, where we want to comment out multiple lines. Technically, Python doesn't have a solution for this other than commenting out each line. However, there is a slight workaround, as you'll see. If I use 3 quotes, either single or double quotes, so that then has commented out everything else. It's waiting for me to end the triple quotes. So if I executed my code now, nothing is going to be evaluated. But let's say it's just the function I want to exclude from the code. I can then end my triple quote, and we can see then that print is back in its normal color. But just take a look at the warning. I can run my code, but moving my mouse over the warnings in the IDE, we can see that they should be used for docstrings and not for comments. So let's go through and tidy this up and look at how we should use our triple quotes. Well, we can use them for docstrings, but we can also use triple quotes to create multi-line strings. So if I have a message variable, and let's make sure then that we assign a value to the message variable using our equal, and then I'm going to open this with 3 single quotes. The IDE will put extra quotes in for me, so it will put the ending quotes in as well. But now everything between these quotes is going to be maintained, including the starting new line and the ending new line. If I didn't want the new line at the beginning and the end, then just have the quotes on the same line as my text. But now when I print out my message variable, remember it's a message variable, so it's a named object inside of Python. We don't put it in quotes. We can see then that we get the hello message, and then we get the blank empty line. This is my message, the 2 other lines, and an extra blank line. But we've maintained the structure of our string. Multi-line strings done and dusted. Let's tidy everything up and return to our function. Look at the idea of docstrings. When we're using docstrings, the PEP8 guidelines suggest that we use triple double quotes. So I've just put in 3 double quotes. The IDE then added the extra quotes in for me. But take a look. The IDE is working for me because it knows what I want to do now. I'm inside of a function. It's read information from the function, such as my parameters and the return value, and then I can put the description in. So this function add is used to add 2 numbers, and we can say that parameter x is our first number or our first parameter and should be an integer. And it doesn't have the extra R. We can then copy this. An integer is just a full number rather than a number and a part, so no decimal places. We can then go through and put our second parameter, and then the return is going to be the sum of the two numbers as an integer. If we add two integers together, two complete numbers, we're going to get a complete number. So that describes then to the developer what the function does, but we can also query functions because functions won't always be in our code. When we think of the print function, we know roughly what it does, but it exists in a different module. So if we want to check the documentation, I can go through and print add dot dunder doc dunder. Dunder is just our double underscore, and we can see then that we get the documentation printing out. And of course it works for other functions as well. So if I changed the add function through to my print function, we're going to get the documented help on the print function. Let's go through and execute the code. And we can see then in my bottom window, we've got the description, and then we've got the parameters that can be accepted. So we've gained an idea of how we can use comments, and the idea that we do have multi-line comments, but they're not fully supported in Python. What we might use as multi-line comments can be used for multi-line strings or document strings within our functions, classes, and modules. But let's take a look at how using comments as multi-line comments can cause us issues in our code. And we can do that by returning through to our Jupyter notebooks. And with our glorious notebook fired up, we can see then that we have our quite familiar add function now. And we can go through and take a look at what happens when we use a multi-line comment. We can see that the IDE didn't do anything with it. It did treat it as a comment. But if I then start a new line with my triple single quotes, I can have a print statement. I can have another print statement. Here I'm printing both the value of 1 and 2, but they are strings. They're enclosed within the double quotes. And then I can close my triple quotes and take a look at what happens when I try and execute the code. Remember what we said about multi-line strings? Well, this is a multi-line string. So Jupyter will process that, and it's actually printing the multi-line string. We can see the print, the new line, and then print again. So we're preserving everything between the triple quotes. So it's just the nature of Jupyter here that interprets the code that we've put in. But then you can see, well, what happens then if we use it as a proper doc string? Now remember, with doc strings, I really should be using triple quotes for the PEP 8 guidelines, but I'm going to stick to my single quotes so we can see we're doing the same as we did before. But now I'm just adding in the add function, adds two numbers. I can close off my quotes, and let's just fix up the spelling of 2. Documentation has to be correct, doesn't it? And now let's go through and execute the code, and we can see that nothing is printing, but it has been interpreted as a doc string. So if I go and print out add dot dunder doc dunder, and remember dunder is our double underscores, and execute this code, we can see then that we're able to print out the doc string. Comments in Python are the hash symbol. Everything from the hash symbol to the end of the line is then going to be ignored by the Python interpreter. It may appear that we can comment out multi-lines using triple quotes, either 3 double quotes or 3 single quotes. However, this method is actually used for creating multi-line strings or for doc strings, not actually for commenting code.